I stumbled on this tweet out on Twitter and I thought it was worth talking about. This is a subject that has to do with linters and formatters. So, for example, Prettier and ESLint. And in this post, this person is pointing out that people use these tools in CI. So, after you push your code, these tools are being used to measure violations or formatting issues. And so, this person's saying, don't do that. Instead, it's a better idea to put these tools into a pre commit hook. What does that mean? Well, it means when you're checking in code into Git or your version control system, you run a little script that checks for violations. And if you go over some threshold, or if you even have violations, you can block the commit then. That way you have to go back and fix the code. So my problem with this post is there's a better time to use these tools, and that's when you're actually making changes to the code. For example, I've got some Python code here, and I've got some extra spaces added to demonstrate formatting. And then I've also got some squiggles underneath some of this code here that point out issues that Pylint has detected. And so if I'm working on this code, it'd make much more sense if I have this inline feedback than if I were to, for example, come over to the command line here, and I've got changes I want to check in. So I can add those, and then I can try to commit those. And then in this case, Pylint runs as well. And in this case, it blocks the commit because I've got violations that I haven't addressed, including that violation up here with underscore underscore copy that I had over inside of the IDE. So this is the same feedback. I'm just getting it either in line with the code, or I'm getting it over here at the command line, or even worse, in my opinion, is have this run inside of a CI environment where you have to go look at a report, or you have to find out why the CI environment didn't deploy your release, and it's because you've got too many violations. So you tell me, would you prefer to have it here at the command line or in CI? Or would you rather have it here inside of the IDE where you can do something about it? And the same is true of formatters. I really like to have this in the IDE because I can select code that I want to format. And if you notice up above here, I have an extra space as well. So I'm only going to format this code right here. That won't fix any of the formatting issues I have with this code down below. So if I do Control or Command K and F, I can format just this code here, or I could do the entire file if I wanted to, in which case I fix everything. And so when it comes to formatting, I personally prefer to have that embedded inside of my IDE, and I want to invoke it on demand. So when I want to format code. And the primary reason for that is I might be adding some new code and I want it to follow a given style or format, but I don't want to go and update a bunch of other code that might divert my attention from the new code that I'm adding and then lead to a nightmare at commit time trying to separate out the formatting changes versus the new code I'm adding. So I want to keep my focus on one thing at a time. Now, inevitably, you're going to ask, well, how do I enforce then that violations aren't present? How do I make people actually use this if it's all voluntary inside of their IDE? And the answer to that question is if, as a team, you've agreed upon tools and those tools are actually valuable, in other words, they're not pedantic and complaining about things that don't matter. Like, I bet a lot of these Pylint warnings here are things I just don't care about. So if I'm not getting noise from this and people agree on it, and you check in a common configuration so the tools are enforcing the same violations on everybody's system inside of everyone's IDE, if you do that and it's actually useful feedback, you don't need to have any sort of enforcement because people will want to keep the code cleaned up. People will want to keep the code consistent. And if it's not a huge hassle to do that, in other words, the config is already there, the IDE supports it, and they get inline feedback, there's really no need then to have anything run after you type the code at code type time, if you will. There's no need to then run something at commit time or even in a CI environment.